study on the 5 aggregates, which is volume 17A of the Sutta Discovery, SG 17A, the Panca-k. Pali one is Panca-k. Panca means 5, khandha means aggregate, or khandha can also mean like a pile of firewood, or anything that's piled up. So that's the original basic meaning, if you like. But here, the Buddha has a penchant for using simple words, giving them very deep meanings, describing the nature of the body and the mind. So, khandha is used to describe our being. We are like a pile of money matter, if you like. There are 5 things here. And the 5 aggregates which are drawn behind. So, as usual, in Buddhist teachings, we begin with simple questions, right? Like, for example, you can say, we've got to ask the right questions. In other words, now, right at the front of this book, you will see one wrong question, one right question. Right on the cover, at the bottom, there is the theme. This is the theme of the whole book. Right at the bottom, before the internet addresses, who we are is a social construction. What we are is a healing deconstruction. Right? So, we are very much a social construction. The moment we are born, we are born into a society. If there's no society, we can't survive anyway. So we are brought up, we are first of all humanized. For 7 years, more or less, we are humanized by our parents, especially the mother. Without this humanization, we will never behave civilized. The very root of civilization is motherly love. And then the next 7 years, more or less, you have the socialization process. Our father, usually the father has the role, but properly speaking, both parents play this nurturing role. Of course, nowadays, the second 7, normally the child will go on to school, preschool, and so on. So, society plays a bigger role here. And then after that comes that terrible period called adolescence. And the child becomes independent. So it goes like that. Okay? So this is like a 3-book training, which we'll talk about in a moment. So asking the right questions is very important in Buddhism, because when you ask the right questions, you get the right answers. Most religions begin with the wrong answers. They ask you, do you believe in this? Wow, this word believe is a big problem. Belief means we have a story and we accept it to be true, but we don't investigate. Whereas the Buddha tells us to investigate. So instead of asking who, we should ask what. In fact, the grammar and language is our means of communication, and grammar and language also prevents us from truly understanding reality. It is quite tricky. So we've got to get our words right, we've got to get the meanings right, and this is very important in Buddhism. We talk a lot about meanings, we talk a lot about senses of things. In that sense, Buddhism is a fantastic system. Call it what you like. Religion, system, philosophy, everything is there. Depends what you do with it. In a sense, you can say Buddhism is nothing. It depends what people do with it. Sometimes people like to ask, others like to ask, what is Buddhism? Is it philosophy? Is it a religion? Right? It depends on the people who use Buddhism. We make use of Buddhism. So if you study Buddhism purely as a philosophy, it's a philosophy. You can look at Buddhism from a philosophical point of view. Most of us here, I'm sure, we like to look at Buddhism as a way, magga, way, as a path to self-realization. If you like, you can say the purpose of being a Buddhist is to know the self, tame the self, or train the self, and free the self. Now, in Buddhism, when we say the word self, we also mean mind, atta. We mean mind. Okay? So, when we say myself, what are we talking about? We're talking about the mind. Okay? So, This is another way of looking at Buddhist training. You know yourself, you tame yourself, and free yourself. Sila Samadhi Panya, right? So, one of the very interesting models, teaching models which the Buddha used is the 5 aggregates, the mini models. Aggregates might say, it's not too easy, not too difficult. The traveling is a bit more difficult. Okay? Now, one thing we must understand is, one more question we should ask is, when did the Buddha teach all these teaching models like the 5 aggregates? After 4 or 5 decades of studying Buddhism, I come up with this idea that we can divide the Buddha's 45 years of public ministry to 2 unequal periods. The first period, minimum about 10 years, 10 to 20 years. That's the early period where there is no systematic doctrines. We don't even hear of the Four Noble Truths actually. I mentioned this earlier before. Because if you look at the Dhammacakka Sutta, it was compiled after the fact. Okay? So the Buddha simply spoke very freely. When you go to him, you ask a question, or the Buddha might come to you and ask you a question. And then from there, the teaching starts. And as you listen, you say, oh yes, and then you become awakened. And then slowly, in the second period, which is around after the first 20 years, so last 25 years more or less, the Buddha began to teach people, even those who are not ready, so to speak. Anyone who comes, sometimes will challenge the Buddha, they come with all kinds of ideas, and then the Buddha will discuss with them, debate with them in a very systematic way. So it's all recorded, very beautifully recorded in the suttas. And these are very valuable documents of the development, evolution of the human mind. So in the second period, the Buddha, you can say the concept started evolving. Okay? One of the concepts is the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates deal in little detail the nature of body and mind. Okay? So this kind of idea sometimes can be, some people today might say, wow, this is very scientific. For example, if you look at, let me just summarize one more time for those who are new for this lesson. Look at this diagram here. This is the body. And circle here is the mind. Overlapping is consciousness. Even this body, you can look at it in 2 ways. One is it is made up of 5 senses. But today we're going to look at it as made up of 4 elements: earth, water, fire, wind. And of course, if you know science, you say, wow, earth, water, fire, wind are at least the 4 states of matter that science talk about today. Right? So the Buddha was not talking science. There was no science at that time in India. There was no science anywhere in the world. But it's amazing that the Buddha would come up with this kind of idea. The Buddha was definitely not trying to make Buddhism scientific or not trying to prove anything except to teach us that these 4 elements are what we are, and to reflect on the nature of these 4 elements, and that way to free our minds. So you can see the diagram there, which I'll come to in a while. So this is what we are. Notice we say what we are, which is the being. So this body is not just 4 elements, it is also a conscious body. Okay, so you have consciousness. And because this body is conscious, it has feelings. Right? So number 1 is form, number 2 is feeling. What does that mean? You sit too long, you feel tired. Sitting too long, you have to get up. You stand too long, you feel tired. So we change our posture, standing, walking, sitting, lying down. So feeling arises through that. The physical nature of our being interacting with the world around us. 3 kinds of feelings: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neutral feeling. How do we decide these feelings are pleasant, painful, or neutral? The perception. You perceive, you relate all these experiences to some things you have experienced in the past. And then later we start forming ideas about this. I like this is good, So you've got, if you say I like this, then the latent tendency of craving is reinforced. If you don't like it, then the latent tendency of dislike or aversion is reinforced, like dislike. And if you ignore it, ignorance is reinforced. So this becomes the three roots: greed, hatred, delusion, right? This is karma. Okay? This is a quick summary. Okay? So if you're wondering, wow, this is really fast, just let it flow through your mind. But these teachings will come again and again to us. When you read through this book, you find the teaching will repeat itself, and then you come again. Next lesson, we talk about the same thing. You go for a talk, you might see the same thing. So Buddhism is like that. There's a lot of replay, a lot of repetition. The idea is we need to be reminded, and then we need to fit together all these pieces, the jigsaw puzzle of wisdom. So this is where karma is formed. And all this happens because we are conscious. Right? So this is like a cross section, you know. Imagine a cable. You cut it across, there are 5 wires inside, the 5 aggregates. Body, mind. So imagine this kind of talk, it is really, you know what today we might call scientific. So because of that, we find many thinkers, scientists, they praise Buddhism. Because here it's great to have this kind of people on our side, so to speak. I'm going to quote just 2 people. One is the scientist, the other is a philosopher. Page 25. Page 25, this is chapter 2a. Whenever you see this 2a, 2b thing, that means I started with 1 chapter, chapter 2, and then became very long and split down to 2. You know? 2a, 2b, sometimes in 3 parts. Einstein, Albert Einstein, as you know, the great scientist. He is said to have spoken this way. He says that Buddhism is a cosmic religion. It's a cosmic religion. It's a whatever religion, a cosmic religious feeling which knows no dogmas and no God conceived in man's image. So he says this religion of the future, Buddhism. The mystery is we do not know exactly where he said this. I tried to do research, and the closest I could get was because he was quoted in a newspaper in Los Angeles. You know, many of these people, they like to, they publish book, they say, okay, famous quotations by great men about Buddhism. But they don't tell exactly where it came from. So it's no value if you don't have the reference. So the best I can get is quote another person, Wilbur, and then if you check carefully, probably it goes back to this newspaper in Los Angeles. It's 1950 something. There you are, you further down, 1954 in fact. The religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogmas and theology. Covering both the natural and the spiritual, it should be based on the religious sense arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual, as a meaningful unity. Buddhism answers this description. Right? So apparently he was interviewed and he just spoke off the cuff, we say, and the newspaper quoted him. So you got to go into the US archives and check out this earlier things. So, and then you have now why is Einstein's, why does he like Buddhism? He's talking about matter also, not ego, abscess, and so on. So in a way, you might say, with a kind of mind, you can easily understand what we're teaching today. Maybe deeper. Or you know, you might get ideas from reading all these things, you know. Right? A lot of people, you know, sometimes they don't tell you the real source of their inspiration until they retire and write books. You know. And there's the other philosopher called Bertrand Russell. You look at the footnote 1, right? Okay, imagine some people just suggest, say, wow, your book is so hard to read, you know, so many footnotes. Why can't you just remove the footnotes? Easier to read. Because if you remove the footnotes, a lot of valuable information are gone. Okay, look at footnote 1. A similar remark is made by Bertrand Russell. Who is Bertrand Russell? I mean, he's said to be the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, the last century. And he rejects all religion. He is quite a radical guy. So he just doesn't like other religion. In fact, he wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Christian. Yeah, very classic. Okay? He was debating with this Bishop of Woolwich. So he says, philosophical conceptions are a product of two factors. One, inherited religious and ethical conceptions. The other, called the scientific. Seen thus, Buddhism is a combination of both speculative and scientific philosophy. Now, if someone like Buddhanath says this, better take it seriously. If I say I'm not a scientist, which doesn't carry water, I would say, but he wrote a history of Western philosophy. Continue. It advocates the scientific method and pursues that to a finality that may be called the rationalistic. Oh, but this is his opinion. I'm not sure if many of the great Buddhist thinkers will agree with him. I won't agree with him because just to say Buddhism is rationalistic alone is not a compliment actually. But anyway, to his mind, this is great. He is a philosopher, so you got to see his perspective. It's a compliment he's giving. In it are to be found answers to such questions of interest as what are mind and matter? Of them, which is of greater importance? Is the universe moving towards a goal? Is there a purpose in life? What is man's position? Why are we here? Things like that. Is there living that is noble? Oh, this is very Buddhistic, noble living. It takes up where science cannot lead because of the limitation of the latter's physical instruments. Right? Science depends on instruments, but instruments, as you know, are man-made. Its conquests are those of the mind. Okay, so this person also wrote in his classic work of History of Western Philosophy, 1945, when World War II ended. So these are very interesting things. The quotation mark needs a bit of correction. You have a double quotation and then inside is a single quotation. It's a minor thing. Okay, so now when we talk about form in Buddhism, matter, form, rupa, the word is rupa, okay? This line here is called a macron, okay? It makes the vowel long, two counts, Without the line, it's single count. Of course, this is long, rupa. It's called a macron, makes the vowel long. Rupa comes from the verb rupati. Rupati means, it means to be molested. Molested in the general sense. Molested by the weather, by the rain, troubled, right? That which molests us, that which troubles us, that which changes. Rupati is a broad sense. Rupa, form is troubling. Troubling in the sense that you've got to take care of this body, you've got to move this body. You sit too long, you stand too long, you walk too long, you lie down too long, it's tiring. You've got to change your posture. Rupa. Rupa, of course, was adopted to the local language, Malay Indonesian language. The meaning changed to rupa means what? Like the look, right? How someone looks like rupa. But in the original Indian meaning, rupa means form, matter, if you like. But we'll be very careful here. When we say matter, form, and if you are a science student, the first time you hear this, say, oh, okay, this is what science is, matter, and you superimpose that idea onto Buddhist ideas. It's a bit tricky here. Of course, in some ways, if you study the psychology of matter, meaning how we use the mind to understand matter, It's very close to quantum physics. There's lots of overlapping. In many ways, if you understand quantum physics, it's easier to talk about rupa. It's easier to understand each rupa, yes. But then again, you've got to remember the purpose of studying rupa is to understand the nature of our body, to reflect on it. There's a whole sutta on this, Maharahudovada Sutta. And in fact, this is the what I'm teaching right now in the intermediate class, intermediate meditation.